But as the last note faded into the air, the room remained still. The silence was deafening. Jason opened his eyes and looked up, meeting Veronica's gaze. Her mouth was slightly open, her eyes wide with shock. She wasn't smiling anymore. The smugness had vanished, replaced by something unfamiliar, respect, perhaps, or maybe something deeper, something that even she didn't fully understand. For a moment, Jason stood there, waiting for her to speak. But Veronica didn't say a word. Instead, she glanced around the room, her face flushed with embarrassment as the other diners quietly whispered among themselves. Jason could see the realization dawning on her, that she had underestimated him, had tried to belittle him, but she had failed. The tension in the air was thick, the weight of the moment hanging heavy between them. Jason had proven something to her, but he wasn't sure if it was enough to change anything. Veronica's eyes flicked back to him, and for a second, he thought she might say something. An apology, perhaps, or even a simple acknowledgement of his talent. But instead, she turned her gaze away, her lips pressed into a tight line. The moment had passed, but its impact lingered. Jason felt a surge of pride, knowing that he had stood his ground, that he had reclaimed his dignity in the face of mockery. But as he turned to walk away, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Something had shifted in the air, something that would change the course of their interactions forever. Little did Jason know this was only the beginning. The story was far from over, and the real test was yet to come. Jason walked away from the table, his heart still pounding in his chest. The tension in the air was thick, a palpable force that hung over the entire restaurant. He couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of satisfaction and unease. Satisfied because he had done something that felt right, something that allowed him to stand up for himself. Uneasy because he knew this wasn't over. Veronica's reaction had been too sudden, too intense. He could see the way she looked at him, the way she seemed to shrink into herself, as if she had been caught off guard by something she didn't fully understand. He returned to his station, his steps quick and purposeful. He needed to get away from the table, away from her, if only for a moment. It was the only way he could calm his racing thoughts. But as he passed by the other tables, he noticed the murmurs, the whispers of the other patrons. People were still talking about what had just happened. Some were clearly impressed, others unsure of what to make of it. But all of them seemed to be watching him now, as if he had become the center of their attention. Jason could feel the weight of their gazes on him, each stare like a judgment, a question. He tried to shake it off, to focus on his work, but it was hard. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt so exposed, so vulnerable. He had always known that his job, waiting tables at a fancy restaurant, wasn't exactly glamorous, but had paid the bills and had given him some sense of stability. He had learned to put up with the attitudes and the condescension. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, he had been forced into a position where he had to confront more than just his job or his customers. He had to confront his own pride, his own sense of worth. He reached the back of the restaurant, a small space where the staff went to regroup, to take a breath between shifts. The kitchen was alive with the sounds of sizzling pans and clattering dishes, but in this moment, it felt eerily quiet. Jason walked to the small staff room, pushing open the door and entering without a word. The room was dimly lit, the air heavy with the smell of grease and beach. He could see his reflection in the small mirror above the sink, his face still flushed from the encounter. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to shake off the feelings of discomfort, but it was no use. He couldn't help but think about Veronica's face, the way she had looked at him like she had seen something she didn't expect. What the hell was that? He muttered to himself, his voice barely a whisper. He leaned against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment. The world outside the small room felt distant, as if he had stepped into another reality. How had things escalated so quickly? One moment, he was just doing his job, serving drinks and clearing tables. The next, he was singing in front of a crowd of strangers, being mocked by a woman who thought she could control him. And for what? A few moments of attention, a laugh at his expense. Jason had been called many things over the years. He had been laughed at, belittled, ignored, and even praised, though that praise was always accompanied by a hint of condescension. But tonight, something had felt different. Veronica had been so smug, so sure of herself. She had thought she could break him, reduce him to a joke. It was a typical evening at one of the most upscale restaurants in the city. The golden chandeliers flickered softly overhead, casting a warm glow across the polished tables, while the scent of fine cuisine lingered in the air. The guests were dressed in their finest attire, sipping on expensive wine and enjoying their meals as the soft hum of conversation filled the room. But amidst the elegance and luxury, one man stood out, not because of his attire, but because of the way he was treated. Jason, a young black waiter, had been working at this high-end restaurant for almost a year now. He was used to the rich, entitled customers who came in expecting the world to revolve around them. He had learned to smile through the passive-aggressive comments, the condescending glances, and the subtle racial undertones. After all, he had a job to do, and he wasn't about to let anyone ruin his day, no matter how difficult they were. But nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold that evening. At a corner table, a woman in her late 40s sat with her husband, both of them draped in designer clothes and adorned with expensive jewelry. She had an air of superiority about her, as though she believed the world should bow down to her wealth and status. Her name was Veronica, and as she looked over the menu, her gaze fell upon Jason. The way she looked at him, judgmental, almost as if he was beneath her, was not new to Jason. But what happened next would change everything. Veronica called him over with a snap of her fingers, her lips curling into a smug smile. "You," she said, her voice dripping with arrogance. "Come here, I want you to sing for me." Jason's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "Sing, ma'am?" he asked politely, trying to hide the discomfort in his voice. "Yes," she insisted, her tone condescending. "I've heard you have a beautiful voice. Why don't you entertain us for a bit? It's not every day I get to enjoy dinner with someone who's, well, like you." Jason's heart sank. He knew exactly what she was implying. She wasn't asking him to sing out of admiration or appreciation for his talent. She was mocking him, trying to humiliate him for her own amusement. He could feel the eyes of the other diners on him, their attention shifting to the scene unfolding at the table. For a moment, Jason hesitated. Part of him wanted to walk away, to refuse and let her know that he wasn't some kind of circus performer to be laughed at. But he was trapped in the moment, caught between his dignity and his desire to keep his job. With a deep breath, he forced a smile, the kind he had perfected over months of dealing with difficult customers. "Of course, ma'am," he said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "What would you like me to sing?" Veronica grinned, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of amusement and cruelty. "I don't care. Surprise me, but make sure it's good. After all, I'm paying for this experience." The other diners at nearby tables were now watching intently, whispering to each other, their eyes filled with curiosity and judgment. Jason could feel the weight of their gazes, but he refused to let it show. He stood tall, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. He could sense the tension in the air, the anticipation building like a pressure cooker on the verge of exploding. He closed his eyes for a brief second, remembering the music that had always comforted him, the melodies that spoke to his soul. He had grown up in a small town, surrounded by a family that loved music. His mother, a singer herself, had taught him how to find his voice, how to express himself through song. Music had always been his escape, his way of dealing with the world's harsh realities. And now, standing before this woman who thought she could control him, he had a decision to make. Jason opened his eyes and began to sing. The first note left his lips like a soft breath, hesitant yet powerful. As the song grew, so did his confidence. His voice was rich, soulful, a reflection of the pain and joy he carried within him. He sang with everything he had, pouring his heart into every word. The room, once filled with the chatter of judgmental whispers, fell silent. The diners were entranced, captivated by the raw emotion in his voice. Even Veronica, who had initially tried to mock him, was now staring at him, her expression shifting from smug amusement to something else entirely. Jason's voice seemed to fill the entire room, reverberating off the walls as he sang with a passion that no one expected. His melody soared, each note carrying the weight of his experiences, his struggles, and his dreams. He sang as if the world had melted away, leaving only him and the music in that moment. And for the first time that night, Jason felt a sense of freedom, a sense of power that had eluded him for so long. But when he sang, when he poured his heart into the music, something had shifted. She hadn't expected that. He could still see the look on her face, the way her lips parted in disbelief. It wasn't just surprise. It was a kind of realization, a sudden understanding that maybe, just maybe, she had misjudged him. Jason didn't know what to make of it. Did she feel guilty? Did she feel ashamed? Or had she simply been caught off guard by the raw emotion in his voice? The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, pulling him from his thoughts. He turned to see one of the other waiters, a man named Marcus, walking into the staff room. Marcus was older than Jason, with graying hair and a calm demeanor that always seemed to put people at ease. He had been working at the restaurant longer than anyone, and Jason had come to trust him over the months. If there was anyone who could offer some perspective, it was Marcus. "Hey," Marcus said, leaning against the doorframe. "You all right? I saw what happened back there. You did good, real good. Jason didn't reply immediately. He wasn't sure how to explain what he was feeling. On the outside, he knew he had done something impressive. His voice had captured the attention of the room, silencing the mockery. But inside, he was struggling to make sense of what had just happened. He had been humiliated, sure, but he had also fought back in a way that felt empowering. He had shown them all that he wasn't just a servant to be scorned. I don't know, Jason finally said, his voice low. It just didn't feel right. She didn't ask me to sing because she liked my voice. She asked because she thought she could make a fool out of me. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, pushing himself off the doorframe and walking over to the small table where the staff kept their personal items. Yeah, I saw that, he said, his voice steady. But here's the thing, Jason, you didn't give her what she wanted. You gave her something she didn't expect. And that's the difference. You didn't play her game. You took control of it. Jason shook his head. I don't know. I just feel like I've seen that look before, like she's not finished with me. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You think she'll come after you? I don't know, Jason said again, this time with a sigh. But there's something about her. The way she looked at me, it was like she was sizing me up, trying to figure out how to make it all go her way. Marcus sat down at the table, folding his arms across his chest. Well, don't let her get in your head. People like her, they thrive on control. But you got something she can't take from you. You've got your voice. And when you use that, when you stand tall and speak your truth, you'll always have the upper hand. Jason didn't respond right away. He appreciated Marcus's words, but the unease in his chest wouldn't go away. It wasn't just about Veronica anymore. It wasn't just about the way she had humiliated him in front of others. It was about the power she had, the way she could make him feel small with just a few words, a few gestures. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what was coming next, but he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. The days that followed were a blur for Jason. He went through the motions of his job, but his mind was never fully present. Every time he saw Veronica's face in his memory, a knot tightened in his stomach. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching him, plotting her next move. It wasn't just the way she had tried to humiliate him. It was the way she had reacted when he defied her expectations. Something about it felt off, like she had lost control of a situation she thought she had mastered. Jason had been working at the restaurant long enough to know that people like Veronica didn't take kindly to being challenged. She was part of the wealthy elite, the kind of person who was used to having everything go her way. For someone like her, being proven wrong in front of a room full of people was more than a simple embarrassment. It was a threat to her carefully constructed image. And Jason couldn't shake the nagging thought that she wouldn't let this go. He tried to push those thoughts aside. He wasn't going to let her control him, not anymore. But it was hard when he kept seeing her face in every corner of the restaurant, in every interaction with the other customers. Her presence was everywhere. Her influence too. It wasn't just Veronica who was on his mind though. There was also the question of his job. Jason had always known that working in a place like this came with its challenges. But lately he couldn't ignore the growing sense of discomfort he felt every time he served a table, every time he made eye contact with a customer. He had always been the one to smile and nod, to do his job without complaint. But after what happened with Veronica, he started to wonder if that was enough anymore. He had always tried to keep his head down, to blend into the background. But that night, when he sang, something had changed. He had been seen. He had been heard. And while part of him felt proud of that, another part of him felt exposed, like he had given a glimpse of himself that he couldn't take back. The unease he felt about Veronica wasn't just about her mocking him. It was about the way she had made him feel small, insignificant. It was the subtle way she had used her power to put him in his place. And now, even though he had stood up for himself, he couldn't help but wonder if he had truly won. Veronica might have been caught off guard, but he knew that people like her didn't stay down for long. They always found a way to regain control, to remind everyone of their superiority. And that's exactly what she did. It started subtly at first. Jason noticed it in the way Veronica's husband, a man named Richard, started coming in more frequently. At first, it seemed like just a coincidence, but soon it became clear that he was intentionally coming in when Jason was working, often sitting at the same table where the incident had occurred. At first, Jason tried to shrug it off, thinking it was just a coincidence. But the more he saw Richard, the more it felt like a silent challenge. Richard's presence seemed to hang over him, like a shadow he couldn't escape. And then came the whispers. Jason had never been one to pay much attention to gossip, but it was hard to ignore when it came from the other staff members. He overheard snippets of conversation while clearing plates or delivering drinks, comments about how Jason had crossed a line, or how Veronica wasn't the type to let things slide. The more he heard, the more he realized that Veronica wasn't just trying to embarrass him. She was trying to make him regret what he had done. One evening, as Jason was filling water glasses at a nearby table, he overheard a conversation between two of the restaurant's regulars. They were sitting near the bar, laughing quietly, and Jason couldn't help but overhear the words that made his stomach drop. "I heard she's been telling all her friends about what happened," one of the women said, her voice low but unmistakable. "She's not happy about it, not at all. She's already got plans to make sure he knows his place." The other woman laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Good luck with that. You don't mess with Veronica. She'll get him back, you'll see. They always do." Jason's heart raced. He couldn't tell if they were talking about him, but the words hit too close to home. He had tried to move on, to keep his head down, but now it felt like the storm was closing in on him. Veronica wasn't just angry. She was planning something. Something that would put him right back in his place, where she thought he belonged. It was late one evening when it all came to a head. Jason had just finished serving a large group, his feet aching from hours of running around the restaurant. As he made his way to the back to grab a quick break, he saw her. Veronica. She was standing by the entrance, talking to the restaurant manager, her face a mask of calm professionalism. But when she saw Jason, she froze. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a split second, he could see the anger simmering just beneath the surface. It wasn't the same look she had given him the night he sang. This was different. This was cold, calculating, and it sent a chill down his spine. The manager, who hadn't noticed the tension building between them, gestured toward Jason. "Jason, would you come here for a moment?" Jason's stomach twisted, but he forced himself to walk over. "Yes, ma'am?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. Veronica's eyes never left him as she spoke. "I've been speaking with the owner," she began, her voice low and measured. "And we decided to make a small change to the way things are done around here." Jason blinked, his heart hammering in his chest. "A change, ma'am?" "That's right," Veronica said, her smile tight, almost predatory. "We decided that from now on, certain employees will be more visible to our guests. You see, some of our customers appreciate a little extra entertainment while they dine, and I believe you have a talent that's worth sharing." She paused, her eyes narrowing. "I think you know exactly what I mean, don't you?" Jason's throat went dry. This wasn't an offer. This wasn't a suggestion. This was a command, another subtle way for Veronica to remind him of his place. He wanted to refuse, to walk away and never look back, but he could feel the weight of her gaze on him, and the pressure of her influence over the restaurant. He wasn't sure what to do, but he knew one thing for certain. Veronica wasn't done with him yet. And this time, it felt worse than ever. Jason could feel the heat rising in his chest, but he knew he had to stay calm. He wasn't going to let her manipulate him. He had already given more than enough. "I'm afraid I have to disagree," Jason said, his voice a little firmer this time. "I've already done what you asked. I sang. But that doesn't mean I'm here to perform on command for your entertainment." The table fell silent, the tension so thick it felt suffocating. Veronica's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Jason saw something like genuine anger flicker in her gaze. She was used to getting her way, to having people obey her without question. But Jason wasn't going to be that person anymore. "You'll regret this," Veronica said, her voice low and dangerous. "You're making a big mistake." Jason's heart raced, but he didn't flinch. He wasn't about to back down. Not now. Not when he had come this far. Veronica's hand curled around her glass, her fingers tightening in an almost imperceptible gesture. "You'll regret this," she repeated, but there was something more to it now. "I promise." Jason stood up slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "I don't think I will." As he turned to walk away, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Veronica had made it clear she wouldn't let him walk away unscathed, and he had no idea what she would do next. But one thing was for certain. He wasn't going to let her control him. Not anymore. The fight was only just beginning, and he was ready for whatever came next. As Jason walked away from the table, he couldn't help but feel a sense of victory. He had stood up to Veronica, refused to be a puppet for her amusement. But the moment he turned to leave, he felt a chill crawl down his spine. Something wasn't right. It was almost as if the atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted. The air felt heavier, thicker, as though everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. Jason tried to shake the feeling off, but it gnawed at him. He made his way to the back of the restaurant, trying to focus on the task at hand, clearing his station, preparing to leave for the night. He wasn't going to let this woman control him. But as he walked through the kitchen, he noticed something strange. The usual bustle of the restaurant staff had died down. The clattering of plates and chatter of the cooks were gone. Instead, there was an eerie silence that hung over the place like a thick fog. He stopped, his heart racing. Something was wrong. As he turned to head toward the back door, he heard a voice behind him. "Jason." He spun around, his pulse quickening. Veronica stood at the entrance to the kitchen, her eyes narrowed, her lips twisted into a smile that sent a shiver down his spine. This time, it wasn't a smile of mockery. It was something far darker. "I warned you, didn't I?" she said, her voice low and menacing. Before Jason could respond, he noticed something else, something that made his stomach drop. The entire restaurant had gone quiet, not just the staff, but the patrons too. Everyone had stopped what they were doing, their eyes fixed on him, watching with eerie intensity. The silence was suffocating. "I didn't think you'd be this foolish," Veronica continued, taking a slow step toward him. "But now you've made things far more complicated for yourself." Jason's mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. What was she doing? What did she mean by making things more complicated? His gut instinct told him this wasn't just about a simple performance anymore. This was something bigger, something darker. Suddenly the door to the back room swung open, and Jason's manager, Carl, stepped into the kitchen. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. "Jason, you need to come with me," Carl said, his voice shaking. Now, Jason's heart skipped a beat. He had never seen Carl like this before. The man was usually calm and collected, even in the most stressful situations. But this was different. "What's going on?" Jason asked, his voice tight with anxiety. Carl's eyes darted nervously to Veronica, who stood just a few feet away, still smiling that unnerving smile. "I don't have time to explain," Carl said. "Just trust me. You need to come with me, now." Jason didn't hesitate. He followed Carl out of the kitchen, his mind racing with 1,000 questions. What was going on? Why was everyone acting so strange? As they made their way down the hallway, Carl finally spoke. "You're not the only one who's been targeted," Carl said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Veronica has been doing this for months." Jason stopped dead in his tracks, his mind trying to comprehend what Carl had just said. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Jason's stomach tightened, his palms starting to sweat as Veronica's words sank in. He stood frozen, not knowing how to react. Her smile was like a weapon, a mask of civility hiding something far darker beneath the surface. He had been through plenty of uncomfortable situations in his time at the restaurant, but this was different. She wasn't just a demanding customer anymore. She had turned into something more dangerous, a force that could manipulate the entire establishment with a single glance. Her eyes remained locked onto his, a challenge hanging in the air. Jason could feel it, that pressure to comply. She was toying with him, making it clear that she could control his future at the restaurant as she wanted to. "I'm sure you'll be more than happy to accommodate our guests, won't you?" Veronica's voice was silky smooth, but there was an edge to it that sent a chill down his spine. After all, we wouldn't want anyone to feel disappointed. Jason nodded stiffly, his mind racing. What could he possibly do? Veronica had already started pulling strings, making it clear that if he didn't play along, his job would be at risk. The restaurant was the only place he had right now, and he couldn't afford to lose it. But deep down, he knew he couldn't let her win. Not after everything that had happened. "Of course, ma'am," Jason managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll be happy to do whatever you need." But even as he spoke, his mind was working furiously, trying to come up with a way out. He couldn't just roll over and let her make a mockery of him again. He wasn't that person anymore. Something had shifted within him that night when he sang. His voice had taken on a life of its own, a power he never knew he had. Maybe he couldn't fight Veronica's influence directly, but he could find a way to turn things around. He had to. As the evening wore on, Jason could feel the tension building around him. The other staff members were all acting strangely, like they were caught between two forces, unsure of which side to take. The usual banter among the waitstaff was absent, replaced by a heavy silence that seemed to follow him wherever he went. When he took a moment to glance at Veronica, he noticed her talking to Richard, her husband. Their conversation was low and private, but Jason caught a glimpse of their faces, and something about the way they exchanged looks made his stomach churn. They were plotting something. He could feel it in his bones. Time seemed to slow as the evening dragged on. Jason tried to focus on his work, but every interaction felt charged, every glance from the other patrons heavy with unspoken judgment. It was as if they were all waiting for something to happen. He knew Veronica wasn't going to back down, and that only made him more determined. But the clock was ticking, and the restaurant was closing in on its final hours. Jason's shift was almost over when it happened. He had just delivered the last round of drinks for the night when he saw her. Veronica was sitting at her usual spot, her gaze fixed on him. She wasn't alone this time. There was a small group of people gathered around her, laughing, chatting, and sipping their wine. But Jason could feel the air thickening with each passing moment, the weight of their eyes on him. And then it came. Veronica lifted her glass, catching his eye. "Jason," she called out, her voice clear and commanding. "Come over here. We need to talk." Jason's heart skipped a beat. He had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure if he was ready. His palms felt clammy, and his legs felt like they were made of stone as he walked over to her table. The group of people at the table felt quiet, and Jason could feel their gazes on him as he approached. "Sit down," Veronica said, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. Jason hesitated, but only for a moment. He didn't want to make a scene, didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing him squirm. So he took a seat, though it felt like he was walking into a trap. "We've been talking," Veronica began, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "And we've decided that you're going to give us a little performance tonight. A proper one. You'll sing for us. It's the least you could do after last time, don't you think?" Jason's mind raced. She was setting him up again, trying to force him into another public spectacle. But this time, he wasn't going to fall for it. He couldn't. He had already proven himself once, and now he would make sure she understood that he wasn't just a puppet for her amusement. "I'm afraid I'm not in the mood to perform tonight, ma'am," Jason said, trying to keep his voice steady. He could feel the heat of everyone's eyes on him, but he held his ground. Veronica's smile faltered for just a second, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, I'm sure you are," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "You wouldn't want to disappoint us again, would you?" "Veronica has been manipulating people in this restaurant for a long time," Carl explained, his eyes darting around nervously. "She's been using her influence to get people to do things they don't want to do. She's even gotten some people fired. But she's never met anyone like you." Jason's mind was spinning. He had always known there was something off about Veronica, something sinister lurking beneath her polished exterior. But he had no idea the depth of her influence or the lengths she was willing to go to get what she wanted. "What does she want from me?" Jason asked, his voice barely audible. "She wants control," Carl said, his face grim. "And she won't stop until she has it. She sees you as a threat, Jason. You've already proven you're not afraid to stand up to her. And that terrifies her." Jason's heart pounded in his chest. He had thought standing up to Veronica was the end of it, but now it seemed like it was only the beginning. He had made an enemy of someone with power, someone who could destroy everything he had worked for. The stakes had just gotten much higher, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep fighting back. As they reached the back door, Carl suddenly stopped and turned to Jason. "Listen, you need to get out of here. Go home. Tonight. You don't want to be here when Veronica makes a move." Jason didn't even think about it. He nodded quickly and turned to leave, but just as he stepped toward the door, he heard something that made his blood run cold. "Leaving so soon, Jason?" Veronica's voice stopped him in his tracks. She was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest, her smile still plastered on her face. But this time, there was no humor in her eyes, only cold, calculating malice. "Do you really think you can just walk away from this?" she asked, her voice dripping with menace. "You're in this now. There's no turning back." Jason's pulse raced as he took a step back. He could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him. He had thought he could escape, thought he could walk away from the nightmare Veronica had created. But now it seemed like she had him trapped. "I don't want any part of this," Jason said, his voice firm but shaky. "I'm done. I'm leaving." But Veronica just laughed, a low, mocking sound that sent chills down his spine. "Oh, Jason," she said, her voice sweet as honey. "You don't get to leave. Not yet. You're mine now. And I always get what I want." Jason felt a surge of panic rise in his chest. He had no idea what Veronica was planning, but he knew it wasn't good. The tension in the air was palpable, the silence in the room deafening. He could feel the walls closing in around him, and for the first time in his life, Jason was truly afraid.